Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Gigi Ilbayumi from the Rodham Institute, and welcome to the Rodham Institute Impact Speaker Series. Tonight, we're actually a little earlier than we usually are, and that's 5 p.m., because we've got a great 6 p.m. follow-up. We're kind of like the warm-up band. Dr. Fauci is going to be on at 6 o'clock. The Rodham Institute is a member of the Black Coalition Against COVID, which was started by a friend and colleague, Dr. Reed Tuckson, and represents the four historically Black medical schools. So we are just so excited to be the lead into that. But before we get started, I want to give you some updates from the Rodham Institute. As you know, we are an institute dedicated to health equity in Washington, D.C. Before that was a buzzword, right? We established ourselves now over 7 years ago, and we were particularly and are particularly active since COVID started. We've actually had about 40 of these webinars, actually probably more than 40 by now. We've distributed over 2,000, going on 2,500 homemade face masks and over 2,000 meals. But what's more important, I think, is that we are standing strong with the community at a time when people are very vulnerable and sometimes forgotten, and oftentimes without a voice that can listen and connect them to services. So we are just very proud to play that role. And if you're interested in our work and want to learn more, and especially if you want to donate, please visit our website. Just Google the Rodham Institute, and you can see not only the recording of this great webinar that we're going to have, but all of the previous webinars, and you can learn more about our work. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our two speakers. Today's topic is about the aging brain, and we're going to talk about what's normal and what's not normal. We are just delighted to have our two guests, Ms. Aisha Bailey and Dr. Christine Prather. They've got both very long CVs, so I'm just going to do just the one-line sentence, and then I'm going to ask them each to introduce themselves. So starting with Ms. Aisha Bailey, she grew up actually in a resident in Ward 8, and she graduated from our very own Eastern Senior High School in Ward 8, Go Eastern. She was awarded a scholarship because she was so bright. She had a GPA of 3.8 through the Washington Post 500 Club. It may have even been higher than 3.8 because they have to maintain a 3.8 or higher, and attended the University of Maryland where she majored in psychology. So welcome, Ms. Bailey. And I'm going to introduce now Dr. Prather, and who's a friend and a colleague, a geriatrician with the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences. She joined the Medical Faculty Associates back in 2015 and really has focused her efforts on educating learners, staff, faculty about geriatric and palliative care, but in addition, improving the clinical care of older adults. And she's really committed to that work. So let's do this. Ms. Bailey, let's start off with you. Please introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what you're doing today beyond the CV.
Oh, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm currently working as the program director for East River Family Strengthening Collaborative, lead agency for Ward 8. And we provide services for seniors age 60 or above in the Washington, D.C. area. And of course, seniors in Ward 8 are near and dear to my heart. I grew up in Ward 8. A lot of the seniors remember me as a kid in the neighborhood. And just to see how we are now providing that support for our aging adults who have provided so much for the community. So we're I really am so thankful for the Rodham Institute for inviting me so I can speak about services that we offer and also services that we are providing during COVID-19.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Prather, can you introduce yourself and tell us more about the work that you're doing?
Sure. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Christina Prather. I am also a Terp, go Terps. Didn't know that, Aisha, and then came to GW in 2015 15 because of a man and stayed because I wanted to, because there's great opportunities here in DC and wonderful people to work with, like Dr. Albayumi and the Rodham Institute. And we, in the Division of Geriatrics and Palliative Medicine at GW, are really focused on educating the next round of future clinicians to know how to meet the needs of older adults. And when I think about the aging community, one of the most vulnerable populations are individuals living with risk of cognitive loss, and the people who are in their family unit taking care of them. And I'll use that word family really generously and expansively to include all those who are touched by the lives of those living with cognitive impairment. I care for older adults in the acute care setting and see where some of those challenges really come up. And in building a outpatient dementia and memory care clinic, where we're really trying to take care of an individual as well as their whole family unit and provide an opportunity to do more research around barriers to dementia care, diagnosis and access and connection to services in the district. We actually founded a new institute here at GW to focus just on that.
Well, thank you. Well, we've got a lot to cover. This is what I propose, that we first talk about sort of the normal aging brain, and then what happens when you have cognitive decline, memory loss, or dementia, and we can talk about what those terms mean. But what all of this means for our community when with COVID hitting, because that is really something that obviously people have really strained and stressed with. So Dr. Prather, can you start us off by talking about sort of the normal aging brain?
Sure. So the normal aging brain still processes information the same way as the younger brain. So as we age, your brain should still work, nuts and bolts, right? So we're constantly receiving all sorts of signals coming in. Your brain processes and receives that information through algorithms or filters that you've learned to apply over a lifetime of gaining knowledge. And everyone's filters are a little bit different, and you perceive incoming information based on all the learning you've already done. That information continues to get stored in the brain, and how it gets stored happens a little differently depending on what you're trying to remember. And how you then recall and bring that information out is really unique to any independent memory that you have. And there's still a lot of debate about exactly how things get stored. But whenever you try to recall a piece of data that's been stored in there, each time you recall it, your body has to go through the process of regenerating the memory. There's no like ingredient, there might be an ingredient list, right? But there's not necessarily a recipe your body uses to pull out all those ingredients and create the same memory over and over again. And so as we're retrieving that information, cues and the routines and patterns that we've developed help us bring out that memory. So as we age, what gets different is that there's a whole lot more information in there. There can be a lot of weeds, and there are a lot of other filters. And so processing can slow down, but it still works. It's all still there.
So I read a paper that says basically that we, as we age, that our memory is just as good as younger people. It just takes us longer to retrieve that information. So the analogy that I make is like it's a cabinet just full of information, and you're kind of trying to go through that. But if you give enough time, we talk about those senior moments, the information will kind of come back, float back in. So I just always try to look away from what I'm trying to remember, and then it'll eventually come back. Is that right?
Yeah, so I use a highway analogy talking with patients, right? So we all start with the same highway generally. And over the course of life, you get some potholes. You have to find some new paths and detours around the way. And lots of things can be done to help keep that highway clear. But then there's a lot of things that add obstacles and barriers to that highway. And sometimes they're permanent and sometimes they're not. And we're working to constantly build new detours and new pathways to get to the information destination. And so the more honest we are about those changes and what's in the way and what's working and what's not, the better we can work with individuals to find ways to overcome those senior moments or minimize them.
And I find it interesting how a scent or a song can trigger a memory, and how you can listen to a song and remember the words that you haven't heard in like 30 or 40 years. How does that work, Dr. Prather? That's amazing to me.
Yes, so memories are stored differently. So for example, you might store a structural memory, how something looks, and that might inform construction. Sometimes people remember their doctor asking them to copy a picture. Some memories are stored what we call phonemically, which is actually how they sound. And so a song is actually stored, that whole string of sound is stored in the brain together. Whereas a word or an individual knowledge nugget or something you're trying to hold on to is stored just like that, independently. And so it can be a lot harder to get that information out. Emotions are also tied to memory, and can really strengthen and provide additional layers and clues to help your body navigate that cabinet. I love that cabinet analogy, when you're trying to get the information out later.
So what happens when somebody is sad or depressed? Does that impact memory?
It actually really does. Yeah, individuals who are suffering with depression, sadness, stress actually lower their cognitive ability, their ability to create and form new memories, as well as their ability to get information out. And so not recognizing the sadness and depression actually can make you present as if you have cognitive impairment.
Mm-hmm. And then before we talk about memory loss, what are the ages that we see the memory change or slow down in terms of our retrieval?
Well, I'll tell you guys, I'm in my 30s. I feel like it's slowing already. I always joke that it all goes downhill from the mid 20s. But really, there's so many things that contribute, right? So how much attention and focus you're able to give to the task, the sleep and the quality of sleep that you have is really important. So our age and what we're doing in our life can contribute at any given point in time. But I like to think about the 5th to 6th decade of life, 50s to 60s, depending on other things going on and other types of risk factors that you have. You can start to find that you need to concentrate more on something called working memory. And that's the intentional process of solidifying information into the brain. It comes easier the younger you are, and the task has to become more intentional as you age.
You know, there is the study that they looked at nuns that actually gave their brains to science. And it was interesting because they showed that sometimes, even if the nun's brain, of course, after she died, had the same amount of change that led to one nun having Alzheimer's and another nun not having Alzheimer's, it really had to do with what, Dr. Prather? What was the difference between those two nuns?
So I talk about personal resilience, but that's not to say that people who don't have resilience don't get Alzheimer's, or that someone who gets Alzheimer's doesn't have resilience, right? But there's certain things that can be protective. One is education. We know that the more education you have, that is actually protective against cognitive loss. But you can't just go through a formal education process and then stop learning. You have to then continue to push your brain, acquiring new skills. I talk with people about, learn a new instrument or pick up a new skill or task. It can be something as simple as a new handicraft, or it might be learning a second language as your grandchild is learning a language, learning with them. You have to maintain a sense of purpose and engagement. And it actually doesn't, there's another study similar to the nun study. There's one that I like to quote that says people who have purposeful engagement, whether or not it's assigned to something you really personally are passionate about, those individuals have less cognitive loss. So we have to have meaning in our lives.
I'm glad you brought up the formal education, because I always think about my grandmother, who was one of the smartest human beings I've ever met. And she just finished at the 6th grade. And she was so interested in a variety of different things, reading and movies, used to kind of play the piano. She loved to engage with people. So Ms. Bailey, I mean, you're around a lot of seniors. What do you see makes for healthy aging from the standpoint of the brain and memory and so forth and the seniors and the older adults that you work with?
What I've seen is that when seniors are remaining active and social, I see a difference. More so, we are noticing memory loss or diagnosis of Alzheimer's or dementia when their senior has been more isolated. So that's what I've seen working with our seniors, is that when they're social and they're involved in coming out daily, coming out into the community, coming to their programs, interacting with one another, that it keeps the brain active. Dr. Christina, I'm not sure if you've seen that also when it comes to diagnosing older adults with memory loss or Alzheimer's or other memory loss illnesses, that seniors who are more active tend to have that brain activity continue. So we encourage our seniors to engage in physical education, physical exercise, and also with recreation and keeping active.
I think, and we'll talk more about this with COVID, but how we evolved as human beings is that even when we just talk to each other, let alone are in each other's physical space, which is hard to do right now, the dopamines, which is one of the chemicals that bathes all of our brains, which is the feel-good hormone, actually increases.
Absolutely.
And so that's what we're deprived of when we're, being isolated. And of course, there are some people, such as seniors, who are more at risk for being isolated. So Dr. Prather, take us through what is normal versus abnormal. I mean, sometimes one can't remember a thing and it feels like one has blanked out on something. Does that mean that, this is the first sign of dementia?
Great question. So we all blank on things all the time, and that's normal. The inability to come back to it and work around to get to the information is abnormal. So for example, not remembering what you had for breakfast, but then you can kind of sit through and think through, what did I, okay, yeah, I did have that for breakfast. That's normal. But not remembering that you went out to eat at a specific restaurant when you go back there the next day, not normal. Right. And so we'll all sit there and go, what's the name of that movie star? Oh, I remember the movie they were in. Oh, and the plot. And I like the dress she was wearing, but the guy, he wasn't so nice. What's the name of that movie? Right. That's normal. Forgetting and not being able to be reminded that you went to the movie is not normal. Right. So when we cannot cue ourselves to memory, when we can't help provoke the brain from pulling that information out, that's when we should start to get worried.
And my brother told me about a new day of the week called Blur's Day. Not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but Blur's Day. And so the routine, and I think everything running into each other. I mean, there are days when I don't know what month we're in, what season we're in, let alone what day we're in. Are you seeing that among your seniors, Ms. Aisha?
Can you repeat that, Dr. G?
No, I'm just saying this, the Blur's Day, that you can't keep track of what day or what even season or month that we're in, because everything with COVID is running into each other.
Yes. Even sometimes I'll speak with the senior and they'll say, was it Saturday? Is it Saturday today? Because we're basically still in that quarantine setting where we're at home, and we may not, the days of the week are starting to just kind of all meshing with each other right now.
Okay. So Dr. Prather, we hear a lot of different terms. We hear cognition or cognitive decline. We hear memory loss. We hear dementia. Can you help us sort those terms out?
Sure. I just want to share with everyone, I thought it was Monday all day because I worked all weekend, right? And so it's all just a blur.
It is, for sure.
And so that is not cognitive impairment and dementia. That is loss of the structure and routine around which we live our lives. And if I put my keys in the same place every day when I come home, I develop a pattern. And that helps me with cognition and recall and reinforcing information from my brain. Okay. So to set up cognitive impairment is when you can sit down with a clinician and they can do testing and say, your brain's not really working at the level we would predict it should when we look at these specific tests. When it becomes dementia, And dementia is a big umbrella term that describes a lot of different types of problems with thinking. It becomes dementia when it impacts your daily life. Okay. So if I can't find my keys because I accidentally put them in the refrigerator when I was unloading the dishes, or when I was unloading the groceries, and I can then go back and be like, I was unloading the groceries. I got home. Okay, wait, where did I put all the groceries? And I work my way through. That's not dementia. That's just, I got too much stuff going on and I need to pause and concentrate. But if you are doing things that really impair your ability to live independently, forgetting to pay the bills, unable to get foods or medication for yourself, the ability to care for oneself or do the job or the work that you've always been able to do because of your thinking, that's when we start talking about dementia. And dementia is Alzheimer's disease, dementia with Lewy body, individuals who have Parkinson's for 20 years who later develop cognitive impairment, or changes after a stroke that have affected cognition, just as a few examples of types of things that fall under that umbrella term of dementia.
And I just want to add two chronic diseases that we are now learning or knew about for a while, but the data is even more robust. High blood pressure that's not well controlled, and diabetes is now seen as an emerging risk factor for dementia. So I think sometimes when people hear the word dementia or Alzheimer's or memory loss, they get freaked out that there's nothing that can be done. But certainly being able to, like you said, Ms. Aisha, the exercise, nutrition, what a huge role that plays, education, staying engaged, as well as controlling any chronic diseases that one might have. So it's a lot. And, we talked jokingly about Blur's Day. We talked about routine. We know that people who are living across the city may not have access in the same way to various, foods or transportation or other services, even things like sidewalks. I went on a walk with my brother today, and it was safe to walk outside, right? In some parts of our city, people might not feel safe going out. So Ms. Aisha, tell us, how has COVID and how have those things even before COVID, like what we call the structural and social determinants of health? I borrowed that term structural, by the way, from Dr. Arnaud. She is the head of the Health Equity section, or the Office of Health Equity at the Department of Health. And I like it because it speaks to structures like, sidewalks, right? Like things like, food, Giant or Safeway. So sort of what is it like across the city? What are the differences that older adults feel versus younger adults, Black versus white, or different parts in terms of the wards in the city? Can you speak to that?
Well, I will speak for our seniors who are residing in Ward 7 and Ward 8, which is kind of known in the city as the east of the river, the east end of DC. Our Ward 7 and Ward 8, we struggle a bit with our seniors living in situations where their income may not meet the criteria to maintain rent or housing or food, being able to pay for their medications, also to be able to pay for basic electricity bills. Those are the type of things that our seniors face in those wards, more so than seniors throughout the city, where it's an issue throughout the city, but more so in Ward 7 and Ward 8. What I found is that our seniors look out for each other. If they notice a neighbor is having an issue, we get an alert from a neighbor, a church member, someone in the community, which is awesome. And then we are able to kind of step in and provide those services so that seniors can remain and age in place, which is our goal. So each ward has a lead agency that seniors are able to contact for assistance and services. And every ward, we're able to provide case management, nutrition counseling, providing some sort of physical education, And also we actually go out to the homes. We were going out to the homes to do assessments for various needs, such as mental health, medical, anything that the senior may need assistance with. And that way we try to provide those, put those resources in place. But definitely in Ward 7, Ward 8, which I'm very, very familiar with, we have sort of like a family dynamic in the city where we're able to support one another, looking out for one another. Unfortunately, that ward also we live in a food desert in that area. We have one grocery store in one ward, one grocery store in the other ward, and our agency provides emergency food assistance and supplemental food resources so that our seniors will have nutritious meals several days a week.
So food, I want to come back to that because when we look at the social determinants of mental health, and we've already talked about how mental health is related to memory and cognition, social determinants of mental health, the number one determinant is food,
Yes.
which makes sense if you think about it, because that's our survival. So
Yes.
when you're looking at behaviors, whether it's kids in school and them being able to focus on learning, or just anybody, seniors or the society at large, but of course people, children and the elderly are more susceptible to that. So what's happening in Ward 7 and 8 since COVID has hit?
We experienced, it happened so fast, I don't think anyone was even prepared for it. Our agency started putting
except the president, because he knew.
Yes, yeah. So what we did was we noticed that the emergent need was food. Automatically, seniors were not able to get out to the grocery store. They weren't able to purchase their food normally through food delivery because that service was so full that they couldn't order Peapod or they couldn't order Safeway food delivery. So we had to step in, thanks to Department of Aging and Community Living, who was our grant funder, to be able to come in and provide emergency meals for those seniors. So we will provide 7 meals a day for those seniors. And the referrals quickly went from 0 to 500 in less than 2 months that we found. And that's just in Ward 8. In Ward 7, I believe, had about 700 new referrals for meals. So that's what we found. And then we found that the isolation, it was starting to affect our senior groups. So we started teaching seniors how to use Zoom, getting them the necessary equipment, teaching them how to use their iPhones or iPads or any sort of smartphone to reconnect with their friends and also with staff. And that way they have like a really great network going virtually. So those are how COVID really affected our seniors. It was definitely the food emergent. And then the PPE equipment, it was really scarce during that time. So we tried our best to kind of supplement where it was needed with masks and sanitizers and things of that nature for our seniors.
So you've brought up a couple of issues that I think disproportionately impact residents of Wards 7 and 8, and that is what we call the digital divide, which impacts the healthcare, the education, but of course the engagement. We actually at the Rodham Institute have called for universal and free Wi-Fi for the city. That would address one part. It would not address having the devices that you would need. And then the other part is the if you will, the IT literacy, knowing actually how to use Zoom and so forth. But you brought up another point about the PPE, which has really been, I want to highlight. So it is estimated that 35% of the workforce, like the home health aides, the personal attendants, medical assistants, have dropped out of the workforce since COVID because the majority, at least in Washington, D.C., over 90% are African-American women, many of them with children and a lot of them single. So they had to make a decision: continue to work, and then let's say, especially when online learning started, if you've got young kids, you can't leave your kids alone, or continue to work and expose myself and my family to COVID, or continue to work and then I can't take care of my family member or myself if I've come back from COVID. So how has that aspect impacted the seniors that you're working with, Ms. Aisha?
We did notice at the beginning of COVID that there was an issue where a lot of personal care aides had stopped working because of that issue. We did have to step in a bit to try to work with our EPD waiver program to make sure that those positions got filled pretty quickly, because the PCAs work with our most vulnerable population of seniors who are isolated. And so that was a big challenge for us. We had to make sure that was taken care of for a large majority of our isolated seniors.
So what we at the Rodham Institute are doing is actually working with various organizations to try to get food and meals, Food and Friends, Capital Area Food Bank, So Others May Eat, Martha's Table. They're all just amazing organizations and really need our collective support, because these are really lifelines for people. And I should also mention that we tend to have this idea about seniors that if you're wealthy, then you don't have these problems. It turns out that actually, I believe something like 15% of residents of Ward 3 seniors have food insecurity. And of course, the social isolation, it doesn't matter what economic background you come from. So Dr. Prather, I mean, with all of these changes that, who thought that in December, we would still be talking about quarantining, and that maybe by late spring, early, summer, midsummer, that we would begin to get back to some semblance of normal. But I mean, is this going to impact people's brains? I mean, is this irreversible? I mean, what's going to happen?
Yeah, I think this has been really hard to watch the impact on seniors who cognition was just kind of living on the edge. And so people I see having the greatest impact with memory loss and new dementia diagnosis are people who were, they had routine, they had engagement, they had a structure. And now when that's all been taken away, it's almost as if you're in a little bit of a free fall. And then my patients who are starting to have early stage memory loss from any number of those umbrella type of memory loss terms, they've been really escalated and pushed forward. Hopefully with addressing depression, anxiety, mental health, getting nutrition, getting engagement back, some of this regression will be able to be recovered. But we certainly have seen that a lot of older adults who were in adult day programs, for example, and can't go to their adult day programs anymore because they've been closed, are at home. And that's a population that I'm seeing a really big impact on. And we have to think too, it's not just about cognition. When you start to decrease your life space, the world in which you engage on a daily basis, for some of our frailest older adults are people who didn't used to be frail, but now are becoming more frail because you're not moving. And when you stop moving, you start dying, right? You have to keep moving. And so now people are having falls and other injuries, and we're starting to see that happen independent of issues with memory loss. As a geriatrician, it's been a really hard time to watch the systemic ageism really play out with the pandemic, right? And we talk about how FEMA still had not delivered PPE to the 15,000 nursing homes in this country, even as late as September. And so as we were talking about were we going to reopen in July, I know that the geriatrics community was saying, hi, the nursing homes need help. When are you going to pay attention? And so it's just so hard to have these conversations, but we need to talk about the way resources are distributed.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I just was so insulted by was this notion that if you're older, well, what's the big deal if you die of COVID? Or if you have pre-existing conditions, that somehow it's your own fault if you get sick and die from COVID. And that was the messaging that so disgusted me. I'd like to pose a question that actually came from the chat. This is from Ms. Beth Nolan. She says that we're seeing that in every state we work with senior services, the workforce is heartbroken to not be able to help and just exhausted. I'm curious about mental health support ideas for the PTSD they are likely going to face after COVID-19 for those serving our seniors.
That's such an important topic, and I'm certainly not a specialist in PTSD, but there's a couple important considerations. Sometimes when you are living trauma, it's not actually safe to go in and process it. You have to allow yourself time to be removed sufficiently. And I'll share with this group, I lost loved ones from COVID while caring for a lot of our seniors in the hospital who were dying of COVID. And I'll say, when I start talking about it, I don't know that I'm ready to talk about it yet. It's really unstabilizing.
Of course.
So we have to be honest about, as we're talking with the great breadth of people who have been caring for our seniors, and from people who are cleaning in the nursing homes to doctors in the ICU and everybody across the gamut. There is so much distress that people are carrying, and there's no way that it doesn't have an impact on.
Yeah. What about for families that are caretakers, Ms. Aisha? What have you noticed? And also the part two, because this has come up on the chat. Let's talk about what things we can do. What's been happening with families, the family unit, and as Dr. Prather earlier mentioned, in whatever way that is defined, right? Because we've got chosen family and born family.
Right. What we have experienced at the beginning of COVID is not only were our seniors in distress, but also staff. So we started providing mental health services via Zoom for both in group settings or for individual. But with our caregivers, I think the biggest issue was the fear, because they were trying to keep themselves safe, maintaining the home, and also trying to care for their loved one. And it was already stressful before COVID.
Exactly.
This kind of made it for them like almost 10 times worse. They were trying to find supplies, and also some of them lost employment, which was really sad because now they're unable to take care of themselves and their loved ones. So we try to provide as much service as we can for the caregiver, but this issue has just stretched far beyond anything I think that we can repair right now. And with the PTSD that someone mentioned in the chat, it's definitely with the staff. I feel like we're going to probably have to have some sort of mental health services provided to our seniors and our staff for for a few months, for quite some time after this too.
Yeah. The Rodham Institute is part of the Black Coalition Against COVID. And we had a meeting the other day, and we were talking about how love has to really lead us in our care. We have to be heartfelt, not just for those that we serve, but with each other and ourselves. I think that, something as horrible as the COVID crisis, the silver lining sometimes is that it brings things into sharper view, and that we are a community. That's what we sadly had lost with everybody running around and, having to commute, for those people commute or transportation, work, all the different competing priorities that people have. But at the end of the day, because you, Ms. Aisha, talked about how community members, look out for each other. And that is really the fabric of the society. And so let me ask you, Dr. Prather, what can we do right now to support seniors, their families, and of course, caregivers in whatever role that they are in?
So I love the idea of leading with love, but would follow with knowledge is power. And so much of this early pandemic was riddled with fear and anxiety because we just didn't know. And that took all of the unknown and just elevated it at a new level. So as much as we can come together with the great programs that Ms. Bailey has and that the Rodham has to learn about how is COVID transmitted? How can we be with our loved ones safely? How can we access Zoom and connect our families doing, Zoom, family Zoom gatherings? In a way, it feels at times superficial, but it doesn't mean there's not meaning to it. And so one of my patients shared with me, the idea of, we need to lower our expectations and raise our gratification. And I loved that. And she's a member of the Ward 8 community and was a home aide who was no longer working. And I thought it was just so powerful to think about we have to have compassion for each other. And that might be just listening. It might just be being, and it might be showing some vulnerability in ourselves and asking for specific things for help, or offering specific things we can do to help our community families.
Here's a question from Facebook. How does food and food insecurity actually impact the brain, the aging brain?
So I have some interesting data. I'd be happy to share it. We did a dementia prevalence report. So how much dementia is actually in the District of Columbia? So the Department of Health just commissioned this research report, and across the district, about 13% of residents are living with dementia, but in wards 7 and 8, it's closer to 15%, while in wards 2 and 3, it's only 8 or 9%. And so what drives that disparity, right? That is directly driven by more diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, which is directly related to lack of healthy food access, safe spaces to be physically active, like we were talking about earlier, right? It's the structural disparity and inequity that we have. And so food and diet from your early childhood inform what your brain looks like. That plaque buildup is already there when you're a teenager, and then it becomes a problem later on. And so investing in our children and our young adults really has an impact on the aging brain. What we're doing now matters, but that doesn't mean that taking someone who has diabetes and is older, treating that as well can change that person's risk of cognitive loss. We can intervene anywhere across the time course.
Mm-hmm. I would just add, I mean, I'm a general internist who takes care of a lot of older adults, but specifically people who are on diets can have problems with nutritional deficiencies. One of the first things that we obviously check for when a patient comes in or an individual comes in is like their vitamin B12. You know, we look for these nutritional things. So nutrition is very important. And actually, you know, I like how there are certain health systems that are approaching aging actually from before a woman even gets pregnant, because we know that the birth weight of the baby impacts and predicts how long, but also how well and how healthy they will live. And if I'll just add one more statistic, right now in parts of the district in Ward 8, the high school graduation rate is less than 50%. If we all just worked on getting kids to graduate from high school, we could add 10 years of life. The life expectancy across the city in Ward, in Georgetown, it's 94 years. In Anacostia, it's 66 and a half. So it's almost 27 years. So these disparities are not theoretical. These are human beings' lives. And it's not just the number of years, but the quality of those years, your happiness, your well-being. And, you know, because to live to 150 and you don't have a quality of care, I don't think a lot of people would want that. There's another question that's from Facebook, and I want to make sure that we're asking these questions. It's so great. What things can we do right now with our older adults to help get back that routine in today's climate and help to maintain that cognitive function? I think we talked a little bit about the social aspects of Zoom and so forth, but any other ideas? What do you do with seniors that you work with, for example, Ms. Aisha?
What we have a small group of seniors that part of a weekend respite program, and that group maintains that connection every Saturday where they get online, and the caregivers have informed that what they do is they set up a routine at home. That's also helpful, so that way they have that consistency where they are maybe for an hour they'll read to them, maybe for 30 minutes they'll go take a walk. So implementing those routines at home are really helpful. And also doing things, I heard Dr. Prather mention music, listening to music, helping them have some memory recall, playing memory recall games. I've seen seniors go on virtual art tours. This is multiple things you can do virtually now. Listening to someone sing on YouTube, old classical songs on a guitar or a piano. So different things that caregivers can do is to set up maybe a daily schedule for their loved one.
So I just want to give a shout out to Arts for the Aging. I'm on the honorary board.
Yes.
Just a wonderful, wonderful
Yes.
program.
That's
and
probably where we met.
Yes, that's it. We were trying to
That's
figure
it.
out when we met. That's it. Isn't it a great program? And they've
Oh
got
my
so many
gosh, the
programs
best.
online.
Yes.
I would just say this, if the caretaker or family members are going to play music, make sure it's the music that people actually, the individual likes. So if they don't like classical music, don't play classical music. Any other tips, Dr. Prather, that you would add?
I just think, we have to hold ourselves accountable and say, fine, it's, you want to get out and walk, it's cold. That doesn't mean you can't have a dance party in your kitchen, right? We have to move. We have to create energy, just like Dr. Albayumi talked about the dopamine in the brain. As you age, your dopamine levels decrease and your serotonin levels decrease. And that is normal aging. It's almost, we have to combat it more intentionally. As we age, we have to return to fun and play. That's why people retire from working. You have to go back to having fun. And it's really hard to do that with COVID. But that doesn't mean that in the spaces of our family units, you can't play with a new recipe or I love the idea of the music. We have a lot of dance parties in my house. We have little kids. But you have to, when we think about routines, that doesn't mean they have to be the old routines, right? They can be new routines. Turning off the TV, not listening anymore to the same drama over and over and over and over and over again, disconnecting from that and using this gift of time we have at home in a way that we can own. It's hard to do, but we can do it as a community.
It is. And I think one of the things that maybe we can hear from our audience, if they've got ideas, certainly, places like Arts for the Aging or other groups can give you ideas. I think this is where just talking with family members or friends or even neighbors to see what ideas that you can, there've been some really creative things that people have come up with. But bring out I was going to say, bring out the old board games if you can stay physically distant. That's kind of fun. Or even, I don't know, solitaire. I love to play solitaire. But one of the questions that came through on Facebook actually has to do with COVID's impact on the brain. We've seen that there are they now have described this long haulers group, which are mostly younger women that suffer with symptoms for months. And actually, it's very much like what we've seen with things like chronic fatigue, that kind of symptoms. And we know that COVID can also affect the heart long term and the lungs long term. But in your experiences, and people talk about brain fog too. What do we know, if anything, from the research, because this is all new, right, about how COVID can impact the older brain or the older individual?
So we have a COVID recovery clinic here at GW, and I've recently had the opportunity to see a lot of these patients who are coming in recovered from COVID, but with months and months of lingering brain fog. And, I think the data right now is there's just not data. I mean, we are really just beginning to see the early information. And I always caution, as we're just getting the first reports, that it's really just the first reports and we need to wait and see how the picture fleshes out. I think with COVID, at least in younger adults, and this brain fog that we're seeing, I believe that the brain is resilient and it's plastic. It has the ability to heal and develop those new detours and pathways. So just like cognitive loss and challenges in the older population, the same thing's happening now with COVID in younger adults, where we're saying don't hide it. The same thing goes with memory loss in older adults. Talk about it, get help. We can connect you to cognitive rehab services. Dr. Albayumi mentioned like vitamin B. We have a lot of different nutrition specific things we're talking about to help augment and enhance the brain. And so ask for help, recognize that it's not normal. That's the first step. And then we can get the information and get data that we can share back out.
I always say when it comes to food, try to eat as much fresh food that has, the least processed food with as much color. And people tend to forget about nuts. And I'm not talking about peanuts or, salted nuts. I'm talking about things like almonds or walnuts or some of these other nuts that do impact the brain. Laughter also, with everything that's been going on with COVID, with the pandemic and racism, with the serial murders, and then the whole political climate, I stopped watching anything that was depressing. I would just go back to those comedies that for me, would make me laugh. But another thing I noticed, because my dad actually just turned 86 yesterday, and my dad is a very sort of vibrant, active adult. And I actually, to keep up with him, usually walking, I actually have to run. But because he was in, physical isolation, he actually had trouble walking. He had to get 20 sessions of physical therapy, and actually had problems with falling because he just was so weak. Now he's getting back to that. But one thing I've noticed is that when people lose, some function, right, like the ability to come and go, the grumpiness factor kind of increases. Can you speak to that? And especially not for the individual only, but for those of us who love that individual. Because sometimes I'll just, tell her it's not easy always.
Such a fine line between nudging someone and allowing them to make their own choices, right? And I just go back to we all have to meet each other where we're at with as much compassion as possible. Everyone is responding to loss in a different way. And I hope, and I see so many patients like your dad who just are losing their mobility, and with that comes loss of autonomy and independence. And we can name it and we can own it, but at the end of the day, he's got to get himself out of the chair, right?
Right.
So
no, actually, he lost 5 of his friends since January. And one of the things over the years when I talk to my older patients or older friends, I said, what's the most difficult thing about getting older? And they say losing their friends. Yeah, I think that's tough. But I also noticed that when we try to do too much and we hover, that sometimes we can, my mom does that. I'm like, okay, just give him some space.
Right, it's a fine line between, is there depression and grief that really needs a medication to help him overcome, versus these are some of the things that happen in
Exactly.
I've had a lot of patients set up, their families set up like, oh, you have a telehealth visit with Dr. Prather, and they don't tell them, and then they're thrown into a visit to see, is that normal? Is that something we need to talk about?
Well, I also wanted to, I'm sorry.
You're going to get the last word, Miss Bailey.
Oh, gotcha.
Please go ahead.
I just wanted to mention to anyone on the line who might be a senior or caregiver, please reach out to your lead agency in your ward. We have an array of services that we can provide in forms of respite care to case management to increase the nutrition. And also there's a Produce Plus program in the city where if you need additional fruits and vegetables delivered, please contact your lead agency for that referral also. Go ahead.
And Mayor Bowser just announced a $1,200 stimulus check for people who need it in the District of Columbia. What we're going to do is we're going to take all of your resources and we're going to post them on our website so that people, because we have to close up. You were both phenomenal. Ms. Bailey, Dr. Prather, we really thank you for all the great information that you shared with us. I hope that everybody can stay tuned, and please don't forget to stay tuned for a conversation with Dr. Fauci. This is through our partnership with the Black Coalition Against COVID, as well as blackdoctor.org. We look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you, and take care, everybody. Bye-bye.